welcome to lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson. Now part of the VSiN family of podcasts, we've got an excellent podcast for you as we're getting you guys another conference preview today. We're taking a look at the smart kids. We're going in on the Ivy League. Here in segment number 1, I'm going to give you guys the betting trends from the Ivy League, some of these styles of play that we see in the Ivy League, and we're going to take a look at what we've all got from these 8 teams. It's good news is we don't have a lot of guys that enter in the transfer portal or anything like that, so the Ivy League Conference Preview is one of the easiest ones that I do, and it always brings great joy to my heart. I always love this conference preview, and joining me in segment number 2 to break down all 8 rosters, we're going to be chatting it up with our good friend Rob Donaldson. He does such great work over at Underdog Fantasy, the show/podcast Rob's Best Bets. We're going to take a look at these 8 teams, and I mean, in this case, you really don't have a lot of transfers. You got a few, like Sir Mohammed going on over to Penn. But in this case, you're mostly going to be taking a look at the guys that are going to be retained on these rosters. And then in the final segment, I'm going to get you guys my projector or finish for the Ivy League. If you have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you have one of 2 ways to be able to fire those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at gunit_81. Keep in mind, letters EM, they mean does not matter. So as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way is via an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it's very much appreciated. From there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. And I do beg with you, I do plead with you, please do send in these Twitter/X questions. It lets me know what you want to hear on this podcast a little bit more. I do always leave these podcasts as standalones for the conference previews, mainly because for these conference previews, I want to make sure that whether you're listening in the middle of July, August, September, October, you're getting great information to get you set for an incredible college basketball season, and that way they're a little bit more evergreen and just utilized as a tool there. And a lot of these conferences, they just go a little bit under the radar in general. So I always like to be able to do that. So let's dive in and take a look at an Ivy League where 3-point shooting always reigns supreme in this conference. And for Yale, they were one of the most efficient offenses in all of college basketball. They were 3rd in the country in terms of 3-point shooting percentage, 39.4% last season. They were a team that, if you look just beyond 3-point shooting percentage as well, they were really efficient on the inside as well. They missed the NCAA tournament because they had that wild and crazy ending against Penn, but this was a bunch that overall, they were 9th in the country in terms of points scored on a per possession basis. And if you're looking offensively, Princeton was way down last year. Now, if you follow Princeton, they had so many guys missing that it wasn't even funny. They were down to 277th in terms of points per possession, 177th with their 3-point shooting percentage at about 33.9%. That's why they missed Ivy Madness. That's why they were way down last season. Brown was another team that was towards the bottom of the conference, 338th in terms of 3-point shooting percentage at 30.3%, outside the top 275 in terms of points scored on a per possession basis as well. So that was massive for them. Columbia was a team that was really able to rise up. They were a team that really did have fire rebounding, but they were a team that, once again, they were solid with their 3-point shooting, 35.9%. That was 61st in all of college basketball. We all know that Cornell loves to light it up from 3. 13th in the country, 38.3% from 3, and we'll get into it a little bit later. Boy, these guys really don't play any defense whatsoever. The Quakers at Penn, these guys were 12th overall in the country with regards to their 3-point shooting percentage at 38.3%. If you look at what they did away from home, though, they were actually 5th. They were 40.8%, make their first NCAA tournament in quite some time. Fran McCaffrey leads them back in season number 1, so you'll love to see that. And then for Harvard, they were perhaps the most balanced team in this conference. Only about 134th in terms of 3-point shooting percentage, but top 175 team in terms of both points scored and points allowed on a per possession basis. That helped them out. And what you're going to find in the Ivy League is that a lot of these teams, in terms of percentage of the shots that come from 3, they are massive. And forgot to mention Dartmouth. They were 51st in the country with regards to a 3-point shooting percentage as well, 36.1%. And that went into the top 25 when they were away from home. They were shooting about 37.4% from 3-point range in a road/neutral court venue. And these teams, they all love to just go bombs away from 3. In terms of percentage of shots that come from 3-point range, Dartmouth was 22nd, 48.7% of their field goal attempts came from 3-point range. Cornell, they were right towards the top of the nation, 8th, 51.6% of their field goal attempts came from 3-point range. You always know that Princeton is going to launch from 3, 79th in the country, which was quite down from them. Again, they were dealing with a lot of injuries last year. 44.5% of their field goal attempts come from 3. Yale's more of the balanced team in this conference. For Yale, 248th in the country, they attempted 36.1% of their field goal attempts from 3. Brown, 244th, they took about 36.3% of those field goal attempts from 3-point range. Columbia Columbia with a little bit of a new look from them. They were more around about 221st. We'll see how that manifests itself moving forward. And then under Fran McCaffrey, the Quakers of Penn, they were very much a team that was very well-rounded as well. 264th in the country in terms of percentage of their field goal attempts that come from three. So you've got some massive outliers, and then you've got a little bit more balance with a team like Harvard. 167th in the country, 40.2% of their field goal attempts came from three-point range. And you'll notice in this conference, it's really a make it and take it sort of league. Not a lot of teams do a great job in terms of grabbing second and third chances, so it relies upon being able to set up that great first shot. Harvard, 292nd in the country in terms of offensive rebound percentage. They only rebounded about 24.8% of their missed shots as an offensive rebound. Princeton right there at 294th, 24.7% of their missed shots became an offensive rebound. Penn, they were a team that was more around about 186, 28.3% of their missed shots became an offensive rebound. Yale's always a team that is pretty solid on the glass, 72nd in the country, 32% of their misses became an offensive rebound, so they were one of the high watermark teams there, and Columbia was a team that really took off with their rebounding. That was their specialty last year, 59th with 32.5% of their missed shots becoming an offensive rebound. Brown was 246th, only 26.4% of their missed shots became an offensive rebound. Cornell, more of an average team at 183rd, and the tempos in this conference very much vary. Now, we will see what Coach McConnell is going to be bringing to Dartmouth for this upcoming season. They had a lot of various styles over the last few years, and this past year, they were 154th in terms of total possessions per game. Princeton is always traditionally a very slow and controlled team. 343rd in the country in terms of total possessions per game. That is the low mark in the conference. And Yale, even though they're really efficient on offense, they always like to go relatively slow. 302nd last year in terms of total possessions per game. For the smart kids of Harvard, they're typically not going to be lighting the world on fire themselves. 355th in the country in terms of total possessions per game. They were actually down in comparison to Princeton last season, which you don't find that very often. For Columbia, they were a team that they were sort of in the middle last year. Again, new coaching regime. They went to 220th in the country in terms of total possessions per game. Brown is typically a team that likes to play a little bit more slowly. Injuries really just caused them to have a bit of a different style as well. They were 218th in the country in terms of total possessions per game. And then Cornell just loves to gun it. They are 40th in the country in terms of total possessions per game. So they're really the black sheep out of all these teams. And when it comes to the Ivy League, I've always felt like there's been good value in terms of the Ivy League. They're a conference that has a lot of retention, so I typically think that in non-conference play, you're able to find quite a bit of value. And last year, it was sort of a mixed bag. Your worst team against the spread was Cornell, 11-15 against the spread. Yale was 12-16-1. Dartmouth was 11-14. Harvard, 12-13-1. Columbia was 13-13. And the teams that hit, they hit. Penn, 20-9 against the spread. 16-12 for Princeton. Brown, 14-12 against the spread. And when it comes to the Ivy League, they're really the lone conference in all of college basketball that gives you those strange back-to-backs where they play on Friday and then they play on Saturday as well. And favorites really do typically reign supreme in this conference. You had a few that were not so great last year, with Yale 11-15-1 against the spread as a favorite. Harvard was 6-10 against the spread as a favorite, and Dartmouth 2-6 against the spread. Cornell was an even up 8-8, but Penn 6-2 against the spread as a favorite. Brown 6-3 against the spread as a favorite. Princeton 4-2, and then Columbia 10-8 against the spread as a favorite. And with this conference, you're not going to be having a whole bunch of travel, because in order to be able to play a back-to-back, you need to be relatively, shall we say, close to these teams. And that's why you see a lot of these teams at home actually really struggle in the Ivy League. And let's go on what it is. A lot of the smart kids have studying to do rather than going to college basketball games. For Yale, they went 5-6-1 against the spread away from home. For Princeton, 6-7 against the spread away from home. Columbia was an even up 7-7. Every other team made you money in terms of their road games. Penn 9-4 against the spread away from home. Dartmouth 9-5, 8-5 for Brown, 8-5-1 for Harvard. And then you'll look at what these teams did at home, and really the lone two teams that were profitable were Penn and Princeton. Princeton 7-4 against the spread at home. Penn was 9-4 against the spread at home. Dartmouth was 2-9. Cornell 2-7. Harvard was 4-7, 5-7 for Yale, 6-7 for Brown, and then Columbia 6-6. And then when you dive in on the totals in the Ivy League, because again, you just have so many harebrained styles here. You've got some extremely slow teams, you've got some extremely fast teams, and a lot of three-point shooting. It calls for a relatively mixed bag. You had three teams that were better to the over. Yale 15 overs, 14 unders. Columbia 14 overs, 12 unders. Same goes for Cornell, but you had a lot of underwhelming teams. For Penn, even though they made as many threes as they did, 8 overs, 20 unders, and a push. That was one of the best undermarks in all college basketball. Brown was 12-13 to the under. Same goes for Dartmouth, 12 unders, 13 unders. For Princeton, 13 overs, 15 unders. And then Harvard, because of their just really, really slow down play, they were dealing with some injuries as well. overs and 17 unders. As a matter of fact, if you want to take a look at Penn in terms of your top under teams in all of college basketball, only 6 teams had a higher under percentage than Penn: Gonzaga, Northern Illinois, Canisius, Delaware State, Fordham, and UT Arlington. So it's a really fascinating conference. It's always a fun one because you've got a lot of roster retention, you've got a lot of smart kids, and let's talk to a smart man about this conference. Rob Donaldson, he does such great work with the show/podcast Rob's Best Bets. He joins me next right here on Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hughes Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast, the Ivy League Conference Preview Edition. Side edge this college basketball season? Well, VSiN experts use CBB Analytics, the most comprehensive college basketball analytics platform in the world. See injury impact, on and off data, clutch time performance metrics, first versus second half splits, and so much more. Utilize the promo code of VSiN, that is VSIN, to get $30 off and find your betting edge over at cbbanalytics.com. That is cbbanalytics, all one word.com. For anyone that is new to VSiN, well, I wish you a friendly hello. This is an attention to anyone that is new to VSiN because you're able to get some free stuff with our daily newsletter. It's a great way to catch up on everything that's happening in the sports betting world. It's delivered straight to your inbox every single morning. VSiN's newsletter offers picks, data, strategies for the day's betting menu, and so much more. Sign up for free today over at VSiN.com/newsletter. That's VSIN.com/newsletter, and start receiving your free newsletter tomorrow morning. That is VSIN.com/newsletter. Stay ahead of the game and bet smarter with VSiN. And we're back here in lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hughes Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. It's always great to be joined by this man, as we've got Rob Donaldson aboard for this special Ivy League preview. He does such a great job over at Underdog Fantasy. He also does an amazing job over at his YouTube feed, youtube.com/Rob Donaldson, with the Rob's Best Bets show, and he's on the old Twitter/X at RobDFB altogether. And Rob, it's always a pleasure, my friend. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for having me on, Greg. And, we were just talking about baseball. Now we got to transition over the Ivy League. And guess what? Ivy League play was really, really fun last year, especially as a former, Iowa, well, not former Iowa basketball fan, but a former fan of Fran McCaffrey, who the Penn Quakers came out of nowhere, stole the league, and did it with some really impressive scoring in year one. It just kind of shows what coaching and just a different vision potentially can do. And yeah, I'm excited to talk about this league today.
And the good news is we don't have a lot of transfers that we need to sift through in the Ivy League. But ironically enough, you start with Penn, the team that made the NCAA tournament last year, 12th in three-point shooting percentage last year. Now they lose Ethan Roberts, but Roberts was actually out for the NCAA tournament game. TJ Power should be back for the team. Now outside that, they do lose a lot of their other top players, but they bring in Sir Muhammad, great name, coming over from Notre Dame. Give me your thoughts here on a Penn team that really built some upward momentum last season, but everyone in this league has a ton coming back, it feels like.
Oh, yeah. The thing about the Ivy League, right, is they kind of transcend the whole NIL roster creation narrative because of the academic prowess that this conference has. And when you're talking about the Penn Quakers, and notably this Fran McCaffrey-led squad, I think you nailed it, where Ethan Roberts was a very valuable piece when he was on the court, but he just really wasn't on the court in a lot of meaningful games for them. Not only did he miss the NCAA tournament, he missed the actual Ivy League run-up conference tournament as well, where TJ Power was really the reason why that they were able to do what they were doing. And when you're looking at this Penn Quakers team again, I really tend to think that they are going to be right there at the top of this league again in the mix. I think it's going to be a lot of the same sort of teams that we've seen over the years. But yeah, I think Penn, just out of nowhere, I think that was legit. And ultimately, when you're talking about building up a guy like a TJ Power, the way that he was built up last season, that was a version that we thought we would see potentially at Duke when he signed there as a 5-star, out of high school. So I really have a lot of upside and kind of feelings of upside with the Penn Quakers. And last year, I truly don't think that was a mirage.
What I think was a mirage last year was Princeton and how bad they were. Typically, they are right on top of this league. And I mean, maybe Bart Torvik is serving me wrong, but it says they have 100% of their minutes returning. Like, they're bringing back Jackson Hickey, they're bringing back Dalen Davis, they're bringing back Malik Abdullah. Like, they bring back darn near everything. I'm sure that they lose like one or two schlubs from last year, but this is a Princeton bunch that they really went through last year. That injury to Dalen Davis was rough, but here they are back with pretty much everyone from last year.
Yeah, I mean, they're only 4 years removed, really, from a Sweet 16 run. And when you're talking about the Ivy League, like we were just saying, you don't get worse. You don't just fall off a cliff because the NIL and the transfer portal doesn't really hit this league the same. And so to see a 9-20 performance out of Princeton, I mean, that was mind blowing. And they lost so many one possession games throughout the course of last season. I really tend to think that Mitch Henderson, I mean, I have so much respect for him, what he's done with this program, the talent that he's able to accumulate at Princeton. Yeah, you know, they lost a couple guys in Xavier Lee to Florida and some notable pieces last offseason, which maybe contributed to obviously the 9-20 record, but they're going to be right there. I'm sure that they're going to be at the top of this league again next season because of the minute retention, because of having one of the best head coaches in college basketball. And yeah, I think if you're looking at some over-unders for win totals or just kind of banking on them having a bounce back in a game-by-game sort of betting scenario, go ahead and take your shot with this team. I think you're going to be paid out.
Yep, I'm right there with you, as we've got Rob Donaldson, who does such great work over at the show, who is Rob's Best Show, joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops. And Columbia was a really good rebounding team last year. I really like what I saw from them. Year number one of a little bit of a new coaching regime. Now they lose a lot of those key pieces from a season ago, so they're really going to be looking to Miles Franklin to be able to pick it up, as they're going to be losing pretty much like 4 out of their top 6 scorers. Mason Ritter should be back along Jared O'Keefe. What do you make out of a team that they were really able to burst onto the scene last season, but that same rebounding may not be there this season?
Yeah, I think ultimately when you're looking at Columbia, they've been a very interesting program the last couple of years because you kind of mentioned the coaching turnover, but also the fact that they really were a team that if you go back within this decade, they were near the bottom of the barrel in terms of actually being able to competently compete. And now it doesn't feel like that's, in their future. That's certainly not been the case the last 2 years. And when you're ultimately looking at the trajectory moving forward, again, retention is such an important part with this league, and it kind of feels like they're moving down a correct path in order to make some really positive moves happen. Now, they're going up against some programs that are much more solidified within this league than they are. And so do they make a whole lot of waves almost to the extent of Penn that we saw last year? No, I don't think that they are. But I think if you're looking at them as just kind of that middling 4-5 team that might be able to sneak into the Ivy League Conference tournament, that's exactly where I would place them. And so I tend to think they're going to have a very similar season to last year, but maybe more competent when you're talking about something like against the spread, for example.
Yep, it's going to be interesting to see how they're going to be able to try to rebuild that front court a little bit more. And then, boy, this might be one of the most fun teams out there in all of college basketball. How about the Cornell Big Red? 13th in the country in terms of three-point shooting percentage, one of the most efficient offenses in all of college basketball, and they could not guard a lick last season. They were one of the worst defensive teams in all of college basketball. What do we make out of a Cornell team that they're just always so good on offense, and boy, they could just use even a hint of defense?
Yeah, and then, when you go back to the previous regime and you're talking about Brian Earl and him, jumping ship over to William and Mary, it was a question of whether or not Cornell would just fall off the face of the earth or if they would change their style. But obviously they hired somebody from the Earl coaching tree and John Douglas, and they doubled down on this. And so, hey, I kind of love it. I feel like with these types of leagues that are very confined and small and everybody gets to know each other over a 2, 3, 4 year span because they're playing each other, none of these coaches seem to leave. You got to have that retention, and you also have to have a distinct style where ultimately you have that ability just to say, hey, we're going to play our game and our game can transcend or at least be competitive within the league. And certainly we saw that with the Brian Earl era. This type of style is competitive within the league. And so I tend to think that, yeah, in year 2 here, I'm firmly behind, or year three rather. I'm firmly behind them being another competitive team. Yeah, they dropped in win totals last year, but they were in the Ivy League tournament. They finished fourth in the conference standings. They had an 8-6 record within the league. Yeah, year three, we might be able to see this team have some unknown, unhidden upside. And I tend to think that this is going to be a safe bet going into the year.
And I'm really liking this team as well. About a decade or so ago, Harvard was the team that was really running the Ivy League. They've had so much bad luck with injuries, what have you, and I forget who it was, but there was a one guy, and I'll get it to you after you tell me about this team, but he was also playing for Iowa State. Towns, that's who it was. I think that was Towns, who was playing for like 17 years of college basketball. It's like, wow, this guy is still in the league. But that said, for Harvard, they bring back 5 of their top 6 scorers. They were a solid defensive team. They were a respectable offensive team. This is a team that I think has a legitimate shot to get back to the NCAA tournament.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think when you're looking at, again, the coaches matter in this league more than other leagues, in my opinion, because these guys stay forever. And so they're either competitive in this league, you know how to work around this league, or you don't. And with Tommy Amaker, one of the longer tenured coaches in this league next to, obviously Jones over there at Yale. And when you're talking about just the pedigree and what he's accomplished, it is over a decade since they've last made the NCAA tournament, which feels crazy because of how many upsets they have sprung within the NCAA tournament over his tenure. But they're always knocking on the door, right? Last year, they were second in this league in terms of the regular season finish. And then when you're talking about just the overall growth that we've seen just in this NIL era, and even just the trajectory over kind of this vacuum period of 5 years, the trend line is pointing up. They went from 6th, 7th to 5th, and then the 2nd. I feel like that's something you can believe in, especially with the pedigree of a coach like Tommy Amaker. So, maybe they are going to be my shoehorned in top 3 finisher within this league this season. But ultimately, if they just start playing hot out the gate, you're going to find Rob Donaldson being a believer in the Harvard Crimson this season.
Hey, maybe they'll get Seth Downs another year of eligibility too. They're just passing them out left and right now in the NCAA's, the Washington Generals of the court system. So why not bring back Seth Downs? As we always bring back our guy Rob Donaldson right here on Coast to Coast Hoops. And this team I think is interesting. The team that has been at the bottom of the barrel in the Ivy League for a long time has been Dartmouth. All of a sudden, a little bit more respectable. Now, they do lose quite a few of those guys from last year. I would say that they're probably losing the most of any team in the Ivy League, but Dartmouth has found a little bit of serendipity. They changed up their style. They're going a little bit faster. They're gunning it from three-point range. What do you make out of a team that I think that could be a little bit of a downer for them this season, but they've exceeded expectations over the last few?
Yeah, they're bringing in Brett McConnell, and anytime you see the change of a head coach in this sport where there's only, a certain number, there's not a lot of players that make up a roster. Anytime you take away the ringleader, the guy that brought them all there, likely you are going to see some exits. And even when you're talking about the Ivy League. And, Brett McConnell, it's a very interesting trajectory, right, where he started out as a Princeton assistant under, Mitch Henderson and those very successful years. He was part of that team that upset Arizona in the first round of the NCAA tournament as a 15 seed. And then he went on to be an assistant under Cal Smith at Stanford the last couple of years. And that's notable because I think both of those coaches are fantastic. And so this being his first ever crack at being a head coach at this level, I want to believe in it, especially with that type of, coaching tree pedigree. So yeah, go ahead and sign me up as maybe a believer that Dartmouth is going to have a year that exceeds expectations. To what degree? I think that's to be determined. But I think, again, if we're talking about this from the betting front against the spread, capitalizing on the bad reputation of Dartmouth playing bad in recent seasons, I don't necessarily think they're going to be that team this year. And so if they're catching a lot of big numbers early, you will find me back in Dartmouth. And, until they show me otherwise, I'm going to be a believer in that trend line.
Yep, I'm right there with you. I do think that they're going to be relatively solid. Again, are they going to be competing for Ivy Madness? Unlikely, but I do like what I'm seeing out of them. And then this team I think is fascinating because for Brown, it just was a case where they couldn't get any offense last year. They do bring back, I believe it's 5 other top 6 scorers. None of these guys really average double figures, but I feel like this could be one of those classic whole is greater than the sum of its parts approach sort of teams. And I do feel like some of these guys who need to take a stride forward, like a Luke Paragon, are going to be able to do so.
Yeah, and when you're talking about Brown as well, it was last year was an interesting season because they had for a 5-year stretch, and it might even have been a 6-year stretch because of the COVID years and maybe some injury redshirt, a lot of things that can factor up within, that time period or that window of time in college sports. But they had a core for 5-6 years that was a legitimate star-studded core. And, if you look at their win-loss records year by year, you might not think that I'm telling you the truth there, but the reality is Brown's schedule is extremely aggressive out of conference. They're one of the few conference teams in this conference that really goes out of their way to test their team early, and I really appreciate that. And so when you're looking at last year, that was almost like as rebuild gets when you're talking about college sports. And although they didn't perform all that well, there was a lot of shakiness from start to finish. It kind of felt like it was a young team trying to find their footing here in year 2 of this brand new core under Mike Martin. Maybe I'm not going to be overly bullish to back them early as a better, but as the season goes on, if they're playing better basketball, I'm probably going to be somebody who believes in that because I know what the track record is with Mike Barton in this conference. It always feels like they're knocking on the door of the Ivy League tournament. So yeah, I'm kind of in the middle when it comes to Brown as it stands right now, but they are one of the teams that if they show that promise, I will be backing them as the season goes on.
Yep, and this has been a team that I've backed for a very, very long time. They've been one of the best against the spread teams in all of college basketball for a decade plus, and year in and year out, they always find themselves towards the top of the league. That's Yale. They get knocked off in the Ivy League tournament last season, and they are going to need to replace some of those guys from a season ago, but Trevor Mullen is back. Jordan Brothwaite, he's going to be back. Riley Fox as well for Yale. Certainly, it's going to be a little bit of a new cast of characters. They lost a few guys to graduation and the portal, but with Yale, James Earl Jones, as I like to call him, he always gets the job done here, and I think that he's going to do so once again.
Yeah, this is just a mainstay, right? How does Yale out-rebound Baylor, right? That was my favorite canned line about this team. And what it really spoke to after they knocked off Baylor years back, and that question was asked at the press conference to the Baylor players, is people outside in the national space don't really appreciate how fantastic Yale has been for decades. This is one of the longest term tenured head coaches in college basketball, if not the longest. It goes back to 1999 for James Jones. And year over year, they are not only right there in the mix for the Ivy, they're one of the better teams in mid-major basketball. And so, yeah, this is one of those teams that you just bring out the Sharpie, you say, hey, I'm going to put them in that one spot, and maybe they finish second, maybe they don't, but ultimately you're going to get a team that if they don't find it out early, they'll find it out late. And if you see them in the NCAA tournament, you don't want to be seeing them in the NCAA tournament. So, yeah, I'm a big believer in Yale as a program. I'm a big believer in James Jones, and just show me faces. You don't even need to show me good faces or notable faces or faces that I remember in this lineup. I'm going to believe that they're going to go out there and produce year after year.
You can have 5 Greg Petersons in a Yale jersey, and I do own a Yale jersey. It's a me own a jersey. And yeah, I think that Yale is going to be able to get the job done, just like you do, Rob. You're doing such amazing work over at Underdog Fantasy, the Rob's Best Bets Show, and so much more. So love to get people at home know what's on tap for you and how people can follow along on social media and other platforms.
Oh, hey, Greg, it's always a blast talking college hoops with you, my man. And we're closing in. We're kind of 4 months out at this point for real games happening. So that's a really fun thing to kind of venture down now over this next 4 months. But, for those who want to follow my Major League Baseball bets right now or my college basketball bets when they come into season, Twitter/X at RobDFB, and also on my YouTube channel, which is just my name, Rob Donaldson. But as always, Greg, I appreciate having me on, man.
It's always great to be able to get Rob aboard. He does such an amazing job looking at this great sport, and every single time he joins me, he learns such great insights. So big thanks to Rob for joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. And coming up next, it is that time of the podcast. I give you my projector or finish for the Ivy. Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. It's always great to be joined by our guy, Rob Donaldson. He does such great work with the show/podcast, Rob's Best Bets. He does great work over at Underdog Fantasy. Every single time he joins me, he lends such great insights. He did so once again today, so a big thanks to our guy, Rob, for joining me in the last segment. Now it is that time of the podcast. I give you my projector finish for the Ivy League. Again, with this being a conference preview edition, any news that we saw in college basketball on Sunday, I will shore that up on the podcast tomorrow. I always want to give as much sparkle and shine to these conference previews as humanly possible because I think that it's very important to be giving you guys some good evergreen information. Whether you're listening to this in the middle of July, August, September, October, just any way that I can get you guys set for the upcoming college basketball season, I am more than happy to do so. So we got you guys all covered there. But how about if we do dive in? At number 8 in my projector finish for the Ivy League, I'm going to have to go with Dartmouth. I just don't know what we're going to be able to get out of Brett McConnell as a coach. Now, for this Dartmouth team, they are going to be retaining a little bit from last season, but you're still going to be losing a lot of those big-time guys like Brandon Mitchell-Day and company that were a big reason why, in my opinion, Dartmouth had a little bit of a come-up over the last few seasons. Like Cameron McNamee, hopefully I got that correct. He was a guy that was able to give you like 6 points, shot 38% from three-point range. And this is a team I still think under McConnell, because he was over at Stanford, so he's got a lot of the likeness of just the Ivy League in general. So he's a guy that's been around the block. He spent some time over at Princeton. He's got a good familiarity with this conference. There's going to be a lot of three-point shooting, like Landon Williams, a guy that was averaging 5 points per game. He shot 37% from three-point range. He's going to be a big part of the team, but let's call it what it is. If you're Dartmouth, you're really not bringing in any sort of Division I transfers or anything like that for McConnell. I think that it's going to take some time for him to be able to get his feet wet in this conference. So with Dartmouth, in terms of my projector or finish, at number 8, I do have to go with them. At number 7 in my Ivy League projector or finish, I just have to go with Brown here. They do return 5 out of their top 6 scorers from the season ago. None of them were really that great though, like Jeremiah Jenkins. He was able to give you about 8 points per game, and you lose your top guy from last year. Landon Lewis was the heart and soul of this team. When he was missing for the team last year, it was just all sorts of atrocious for them, so you do have to have some question marks there. I'm going to get this name incorrect. Adrian Adechino, hopefully I got that correct. He was able to give you 9 points at a steal per contest. And then Nafara Dabo down low. He should be able to be a nice shot blocker. He was able to give you a block and a half per contest. Brown is going to be a solid defensive team in this conference, but still, in terms of their offense, left a lot to be desired. They were outside the top 300 in terms of their three-point shooting percentage last year, outside the top 250 in terms of points scored on a per possession basis, and they were especially bad with their offense at home. They were a bottom 35 team in terms of points scored on a per possession basis at home. So while I like the roster retention, while I like someone like a Isaiah Langhorne coming back, giving you about 8.5 points per game, have a lot of question marks with this team. So in terms of my projector finish, at number 7 in the Ivy League, I'm going to have to go with Brown. Number 6 in my Ivy League projector finish, I'm going to be going with Columbia, and I actually love what Kevin Hovde was able to do last season. He was able to get this team instantly competitive. They were one of the best rebounding mid-majors in all of college basketball, but you just lose so many of these guys from a season ago. Blair Thompson, Kenny Norad, they were 2 double-figure scorers. They were the heart and soul of the team. You also lose a guy in Zadiu Eddie Bedry. Hopefully I got that correct. I'm sure that I did not, but I knew he was a guy that was limited last year. I thought that he was going to be a nice rebounder if they kept him. They were not able to, so that's a little bit of an issue. And now you're going to be looking to mix and match. Someone like a Mason Ritter was able to give you 7 points, 5 rebounds per game. He's solid. Jared O'Keefe, he was able to give you about 8.5 points per game. These are going to be more of your heart and soul guys. Now, Miles Franklin last year as a freshman, 9.5 points per game. He's not necessarily that main facilitator, but he's a guy that can play off the ball at 6'5". He's going to be able to give you a little bit of three-point shooting for a Columbia team that was in the top 75 in terms of three-point shooting. And putting Columbia at number 6 is not necessarily a knock on them. In my opinion, it's just how good the Ivy League is going to be this year. Like, I think a lot of people are sleeping on this Ivy League. I think that this is going to be an incredible conference. That said, you do have to work on the fundamentals as well. This team was right around about 300th in the country with regards to their free throw shooting percentage. They were outside the top 285 in terms of turnovers on a per possession basis as well. They didn't generate a lot of turnovers. When you don't make free throws, when you turn the ball over, darn near 3 times per game more than your opponent, that really leaves you in a tough spot, and they just don't have the same rebounders that they did from a season ago as well. So number 6 in my projector finish, I'm going to be going with Columbia. At Mumbo number 5 in my projector finish for the Ivy League, where I'm going with Cornell. Boy, does Cornell need to work on the defense. This team was well outside the top 300 in pretty much every defensive category humanly imaginable, but this team was absolutely able to go bombs away from three-point range. But the problem is you lose someone like a Jake Feigen from last year. A lot of those top scorers are going to be gone from this Cornell team, so they're going to need to retool. Now, I just have a lot of faith in John Jaquez to be able to do a solid job with this team. They just always seem to be like in that 4 or 5 seed range with regards to the Ivy League. Obviously, losing Cooper Norrett, that's going to be big as well, because Jacob Barcelos, he was able to average about 7 points, 3 assists per game. They're going to be looking to him quite a bit. They lose Josh Baldwin as well. That, I think, is an underrated loss. He led the team in assists last year. Now, they are going to be, in my opinion, a little bit better down low. Retaining Casper Sepp, their top rebounder with about 5.5 rebounds per game. If I'm not mistaken, he began his career over at Valparaiso. That's going to be helping out. And they always seem to do an okay job with regards to recruiting. And you do see it with this Cornell team. You have some guys that are like completely off the radar that, maybe they average like 3-4 points from the previous season, and then they're all of a sudden able to go into inferno mode. Like Ian Amagu, hopefully I got that correct, might be Amagu. He was a guy that was limited to 15 games last year. He was averaging about 5 points per game as a 6'9", little bit of a combo guy. That's a guy that I think could really be able to take some strides forward here for this Cornell team. So for Cornell, I think that they're going to be once again right there towards the middle of the conference, fighting for that 4th seed in Ivy Bandits. I've got Cornell in my Ivy League projector finish at Mambo number 5. Number 4, I go with Penn. Penn was able to represent in the NCAA tournament last year. As we know, they were not the number 1 seed when it came to this conference tournament. They had that huge upset to be able to get them into the NCAA tournament with having TJ Power and Ethan Roberts just absolutely carry the mail for the team last season, and now they're going to be without Ethan Roberts. That's big. So now it's on TJ Power, a guy that was a former top 25 recruit, was unable to get out there at Duke and Virginia. He made the most of his opportunity last year, 16.5 points, 7.5 boards, and keep in mind, this is a Penn team. That last year they were a top 10 team in terms of three-point shooting percentage, shot over 40% from three-point range away from them last year. You do have to have some question marks a little bit more with the low post play, and they were one of the luckiest teams in all of college basketball. Team shot 67.3% at the free throw line against Penn. That was a top 5 mark in all of college basketball. If you factor in both Division I and non-Division I games, they were a team that was rough on the inside. They were outside the top 325 with their own 2-point shooting percentage, outside the top 275 in terms of opponents' 2-point shooting percentage. This is an Ivy League, which you have a lot of teams that they love to go bombs away from 3-point range, so they're not going to be hurt by that as much as, say, other teams, but I do have to question how some of these other guys are going to be able to step up. Like an AJ Levine. Is he going to be able to go from being an 8-point per game scorer, and is he going to be able to up that 3-point shooting? Is he going to be able to be that main facilitator for this team? Augustus Gerhardt was a nice little bit of a background dancer sort of guy for this team. 5.5 points, 4.7 rebounds per game. But you do have Sir Muhammad who's coming in. You don't get a lot of transfers in the Ivy League. He was a solid player over at Notre Dame. He should be able to help this team out down low. But again, losing Ethan Roberts, we saw the difference between him being on the floor and off the floor. I think that that's going to prevent Penn from being back in the top 3 in this conference. So number 4 in my projector finish, going with the Quakers of Penn. And number 3 in my projector finish for the Ivy League, we're going to go with the smart kids of Harvard. And for Harvard, they're bringing back over 75% of their minutes last year. That might change a little bit because sometimes the rosters are a little bit unclear here in the month of July. But for Tommy Amaker, his teams have been snake bit by injuries for like a decade. Like ever since they knocked off New Mexico in the NCAA tournament, you go all the way back to, I believe it was like Sam Towns, it might be Seth Towns, whoever Towns was. He was in college basketball for 8 years, and he couldn't get out there on the floor to save his life for this Harvard team. Like every single year, it feels like 3 guys get hurt for this team. I have no idea how, I have no idea why, but Harvard always has these injuries, but they're getting back pretty much everyone from a season ago. Robert Hinton is hitting it hard. He's giving you 17 points. He's able to give you multiple assists per game. Tate Barber, 13.5 points, 5.5 boards. You've got a guy in Thomas Beatties who's able to give you 12.5 points per game. I believe you should be getting 5 of your top 6 scores back for this team unless we have something at the last second happen. I know that Austin Hunt was dealing with a little bit of injury. He's going to be back in the fold for this team after he was limited to 14 games last season, and here's what I like about Harvard. They do the little things well. They shot 79.9% at the free throw line if you include Division I and non-Division I games. Numero uno in all of college basketball. Tommy Amaker has a nice, well-oiled machine, a top 135 team in terms of their 2-point shooting percentage. Solid 3-point shooting team. One of the better 3-point shooting defenses in the conference. They may not blow you away in one specific thing other than perhaps their free throw shooting, and they were super slow last year in terms of total possessions per game. Bottom 15 team in all of college basketball, but they make the most out of those possessions. They really really grind things down to a halt, and neither they nor their opponents are going to get second and third chances, and they've got some good shooters on the team. So give me Harvard at number 3 in terms of my projector or finish. Number 2, Yale is losing a lot from last year, but in James Jones, and I like to call him James Earl Jones, I'm going to be willing to trust here, because Yale, it just feels like every single year you have some guy that was averaging like 3-4 points per game where you're like, oh, this guy wasn't too much of a factor, and then boom, all of a sudden he just goes into inferno mode the next year. Like, I think Riley Fox is going to be the real deal. He was more of the sixth man for this team last year, 10 points per game. He was shooting about 37.2% from 3-point range. I think he's going to be in for a massive year, and they're going to need it because Isaac Salazar, Nick Townsend, I mean, these guys are out, and Townsend was just an absolute flamethrower from 3-point range last year. But Trevor Mullen, he should be back for this team unless if there's something unbeknownst to me. 11.5 points, 2.7 assists per game. He should be carrying the mail a lot for this team. He was able to shoot about 38% from 3-point range. Jordan Bothwaite, I believe I got that correct. He was a 44% 3-point shooter. Again, a guy that averaged like 6.5 points per game. I think that he's going to be able to take off right away. And for Yale, they do a nice job in terms of recruiting as well. Do they have like any 5-star guys or anything like that? No, but a Tim Winker who comes in at 6'10", I think they could be one of the next of these really good big men. Jack Sullivan, he's a guy with size that really didn't see a lot of playing time last year. I think that he comes in right away. He's going to be able to give you some good production. And for Yale, even though they don't necessarily have a lot of their guys returning from the season ago, I just can't put Yale any further down because every single year, James Jones finds a way to do more with less. Like, I have no idea how. I have no idea why. One of the most underrated coaches in all of college basketball. So even though Yale is going to be losing a lot from a team that was top 10 in terms of points scored on a per possession basis last year, I'm going to put them number 2 in my projector finish. And at number 1, I'm banking on Princeton. Princeton was just ravaged by injuries last year. You saw it when they were without one of their main men in Dallin Davis, with him out versus him in. I think that this is going to be a team that takes strides forward. Bart Torvik right now says that they have 100% of their minutes back from last year. I have to think that they lost someone. Like, I mean, it might be a guy that only played in like 5 games or something like that. They had to have lost someone, but I mean, all these guys, like a Jackson Hickey was a nice double-figure scorer for them. You're going to be getting back CJ Happy. That makes me happy. Jack Stanton. Like, all these guys are back for a Princeton team that they love to go bombs away from 3. They don't allow you to be able to get a lot of second and third chances when they're at full force. This is not a team that's going to give themselves a lot of second and third chances. They're not going to generate a lot of turnovers, but when they're at peak force, they are a team that they absolutely light you up from 3-point range. You've got Malik Abdullah down low. Hopefully you got that correct. He's a 6'7" guy that's able to play inside out. He's going to do a nice job down low for this team. Landon Clark, I think, is going to take some really nice strides forward for this bunch as well down low. And you've got a lot of versatility, a lot of guys that stand like 6'6", 6'7". They're able to go bombs away from 3. Having a full season for Dallin Davis as well, I think is going to be massive. Mitchell Henderson teams do not have back-to-back bad years. That is not going to be happening for Princeton. They are not far removed from making a Sweet 16. And I think that Princeton, after last year, they were just absolutely one of the most unlucky teams to the injury bug in all of college basketball. Lost so many 1 or 2 possession games. We see some positivity from them. They don't just get back to Ivy Madness. They win Ivy Madness. Give me Princeton to win the Ivy League this year in my projector or finish. And that'll wrap things up for my Ivy League Conference Preview Edition right here on Coast to Coast Hoops, now part of the VSiN family of podcasts. Big thanks to our guy, Rob Donaldson. He does such great work with the show/podcast, Rob's Best Bets. He joined me in the last segment. If you do like hearing from this fine podcast, Coast to Coast Hoops, you're able to subscribe wherever your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. If you have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you have 1 of 2 ways we fire those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at gunit_81. Keep in mind, Larry CM, they mean does not matter. So as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it's very much appreciated. From there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. I'm with you guys every single day on this podcast, give you picks and analysis on every game every day. And here in the off season, we are giving you guys conference previews for every one of these conferences, keeping up with all the news. And we've actually had a lot out here in July. And I always like to say, bets that are won during the season are done through great preparation, just taking a look at the landscape and not being asleep at the wheel. So I'm going to give you guys a podcast every single day. We're up to over 2,403 days without a missed podcast. So I'll be back with you once again tomorrow. Thank you.